Today we've got this really cool website design in Adobe XD. It's got a feminine touch to it and it's got a lot of bubbling SVG content. We're going to take a look at how we can turn this into a full-fledged website using CSS and HTML and JavaScript. I'll take you through the whole process, from starting with a completely empty page to building up the website so that it's not only working for desktop, but it's also responsive and works across all devices, whether there are tablets or phones or laptops. We're going to take a look at the inner workings of how to do proper styling in terms of CSS, as well as how to make sure that the HTML markup does fit all the standards of HTML5. And we'll also have a look at how to make the development cycle much faster for you. Now, if you don't know, my name's Adrian and I'm from Australia. I'm doing videos about design and development. So if you like this kind of content and you want to see more like it, hit like and hit subscribe, and let's just jump right into it. So here's the template we'll be working on today. There's a few files here for desktop, tablet, even responsive design for iPhones. But we'll start off having a look at the main website for desktop. Here we can see we've got some nice big elements. We've got our big navigation up here with a slider, a key message, and a supporting message. This slider has a nice overlay with an SVG here, and then we've got a call to action, which is to collect the email address. If we go down here, we have some supporting information with a nice picture that also has some SVG on it. And we've got a button with some nice box shadow there. If we keep going down, we've got another element here with another picture and button. And finally, we've got the footer with some basic contact information. If we take a look at some of the other designs over here, we can see that the responsive design comes in very similar to what the original design looks like, and most of it seems to fit in and flow naturally with good breakpoints. We'll take a look at starting our development on just the header element here, and we'll do this by opening up brackets and starting the HTML for this. So here we have a completely blank canvas. We've got a base HTML file with a bootstrap pulled in, and it's pulling in a completely empty styles.css. What we're going to do is just make sure it's working by creating a h1 tag and typing in testing. In here, let's make sure that we can change the font size by maybe making it 11 pixels. So that does seem to be working. The first thing that we'll do is create the navigation that we saw up here. If we take a look at this and create a box element, we can see that the height is around 200 pixels. So let's create that in our document. What we'll do is we'll create a header section, and in this element we'll put in a logo and maybe also a nav. For the nav, we'll do a list of items, which will be A tags. And for the time being, they'll just be completely empty. But what I'll do is I'll make sure that they're the same as they are here in the design doc. So we've got home. Let's copy this across, and we'll do this one as the active one. The second one being about us. And if you have a look here, you'll see that I'm not making them capitalized. That's because we can do this later in the CSS. Services. Testimonials. FAQ. And contact. Great. So that gives us most of the content. We just need to pull in this logo here that we have for the company. So what we'll do is we'll export this. So we can do this by simply selecting it, selecting up here to do an export and just the selected item. We'll export this currently as a PNG for the web, and we'll do a 2x graphic. Then we'll also set the directory for this, and in this case it's just going to be under GitHub, on YouTube, template 4.1, and just in here we'll do the export. Great. So this should be in our folder now. What we can do is we can pull in this image and reference it. I think if we pull up the sidebar here, we can see that we have logo dash blue. Let's reference that now. And we'll put an alt tag in here of logo. Great. Let's have a look how that's looking. So this looks all right. This is essentially the navigation on the header without any styling at all. So the next thing we want to do is start styling this header. Let's open up our style sheet and we'll put in all the elements that we'll be using. So we've got the logo here. We'll also pull in the nav, the UL, the LI, and the A tag. Finally, we'll also pull in this image over here. Great. So for the header, we want it to be about 200 pixels. We also want it to be a display of flex. That way we can make sure that those two elements are next to each other. For the nav, we want the flex to be 1. So let's do this now. This just means that it'll span across the whole row. If we check it now, it should do that. In terms of the UL, we'll want to remove all this styling and create our own. So we'll do list style, and for that we'll actually just set it to none. We'll remove the margin that's happening, and we'll remove the padding that's happening. Great. And finally, for the LI elements, we might want them to just be a list. So we'll do display inline block. Great. And for the A tag, we'll also do them as inline blocks. So that gets us started. Now for the header, we'll probably want some general padding around their sides. So we'll do 30 pixels. Next, for the image, I see that it's not the right size. So let's do 2x. Let's make sure that's in there. That is at 2x. Great, that's looking a little bit better. Next up, for the actual elements here, we'll need some spacing. So we'll do margin right. We'll do that at 30 pixels. Let's double check our design doc here. So it's about 50-50, but there's a lot of padding happening here between the logo and the menu. For now, let's not worry about that too much. Let's focus on the styling of our menu. So if we have a look at the styling here, these elements here are railway with a font size of 20 in bold. So what we'll do is we'll jump into Google and we'll go to Google Fonts. Here, we'll grab railway and we'll copy this in for Google Fonts and add it as a package for our website. Let's select it in here and pull it in. We'll also select a light and a bold version. Let's copy this link in to our code and put this into the index.html page. Let's save that and then also copy in the CSS that we'll want to put in our body tag so that the elements are using this code. There. So that should be done now. And if we have a look, it is using that font, which is great. Next up, we'll want to go to this LI section and we'll want to do font size 20 pixels, font weight bold, and the color. Let's pull that across. If we check our design doc here, we should have the color for this text. So if we check the color here, the text is a 707070, which is all right. It's just a dark gray. So let's add this in here for the color. Let's make sure that's copied in our clipboard. Great. So that should apply in any second now. Let's remove this. Great. And this is only happening on the active element in terms of its bold status. And we also have this fill. Let's copy this fill color in because it seems like a variable that we can reuse all over the place. We'll call this our secondary color. And we'll put in the hex code in here. So what we'll do in order to use this is just use the sass variable. We'll pull this in here and we'll create an and active. And for that section, what we'll do is we'll do the background with the secondary variable. We'll do a padding of 15 pixels, which we'll just put above to the main element. And finally, for the font weight, we'll set it in here. Finally, we'll also make sure that all of this is inside the A tag. So I think that should be it. Finally, let's also move this active element underneath the A tag so that it has more priority. If we take a look now, we can see that all these are now applying and they're looking a little bit better, a bit more closer to the template file. We have a nice border radius around this element, so let's add that in. What we'll do is we'll put in border dash radius, and we'll do 1.5 EM, which is essentially the font size and a half. If we take a look, that looks more or less what it looks like in the design doc. Let's zoom out a little bit here and have a look what else we need to do. So in terms of the design doc, there's a little bit of padding between each one of these elements, and these elements have a very light font weight when they're not active. So we'll do this now. We'll add font weight, and here we'll just do something like light or lighter. If we take a look, that's looking a little bit better, and I think we're more or less done. We'll just add a little bit of padding to the left and right sides, maybe 20 pixels. So I think that's pretty good there. Finally, let's make both of these a flex one. And after we do that, let's make them a display flex with a justify content of center. Great. And with the logo, if you have a image inside of a logo, it sometimes goes a bit funny if you set it to flex. So we'll just create one more element to nest it inside here, and we'll rename this to logo holder. Let's save that and rename it here. Great. And this is about 0.66, whereas this one is more about 0.99. So if we have a look at the design doc, we do have a lot of padding here on the right and the left. Let's see if we can keep that consistent for this page, because in this term, the page is looking okay, but first of all, we need to make sure that all the elements are centered. To do that, we just do a align dash items, and here we'll do center. That makes them all nice and centered. And now I'm pretty happy with that. I think it's consistent with the design that we're trying to do, which is pretty good so far. For this next section, we're going to have a look at how we can pull this background image out of Adobe XD, create this SVG element, which looks like it's actually a mask for the background image, as well as adding in the supporting text. So to start off with, let's double click on this element here and export it into Photoshop. We'll pull this in and make sure it's the right size. We want it to be 128 pixels, which it looks like it already is. Next, we'll click File, Export, and Save to Web. We want to select this as a JPEG with medium compression level, which is only about 93 kilobytes. We'll save this into our main directory and just call this banner slider 1. With that saved, we can then have a look at the SVG element. It's back here, and to export that, we're going to do that a little bit different. We're going to click File up here, Export, Selected, and we're going to select the SVG format and export that one element. Now, I've already done this, so I'll just click Cancel on this section. Once that's done, let's create a new section here for our HTML document. We'll hide this header section, and we'll do a section here, which will be called maybe Hero Banner. For this Hero Banner, we'll have a slide with a slide and an image, and maybe some supportive text, which will be just called content. All right, and in this section, we'll create two tags. We'll do a title tag, which will have our key message in here. And we'll also do a secondary tag, which we'll call subtitle. And in here, we'll call our second message, which is our supporting message. Let's paste that in there and save that. And let's have a look at our content here. So that's looking good. For the slide, let's create the classes for this. So we've got our hero banner. Let's put that in here. And then underneath that, we've got a slider with a slide and some content, which has also the title and the subtitle. Also in here we have an image. Let's put that in. Now for the slide, I think the height is about 640 pixels. Let's double check that. Yeah, that's more or less 640 pixels. For the time being, we'll just do the background as the secondary color here. So let's apply that by doing background dash color and putting in that secondary value. If we take a look at this now, we see that we've got the working blocks of our banner here ready. Next, let's add in the picture that we have, which is over here. It's just called slider overlay. No, sorry, banner slider 1. Let's copy the name for that. And in the image here, let's do background-image URL and pass that in. We'll also do background size is cover, background repeat is no repeat, and maybe also background position is center. Great. Now to make sure that actually works, we'll do a flex in here. We'll do display, flex, and for the image, we'll do flex is 1. We'll do the same for the content, just so that they both take up equal sizes. And let's see what we come up with that. So if we have a look here, we've got our slide, image, and content. Now our image isn't showing up yet. I think there's a small bug here, so let's have a look what that might be. Slide display, we haven't called the proper attribute there, so that's display flex. So now it's taking up 50-50 here in terms of the size, and with this image we're going to have to mask or overlay it, and to do that we're going to have to pull out this SVG element. So let's double click on this and let's have a look at how we'll pull this out. We just have to export it, and I've already done that, which is over here. And I'm going to pull this into Adobe XD. Sorry, I'm going to pull this into Adobe Illustrator. In here, we should have the shape. We've got a background image that we had earlier, but we'll remove that. And then we've just got the shape here. We can give it a color, such as that secondary color. And it's currently the wrong way around. We could flip it or reverse it, but it's not going to have that same shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new shape on top. And this shape, I'll just make it a slightly darker color so you can see it. And what we're going to do is we're going to exclude it from the shape below. So if we've got the shape here, we can hit Control Shift F9. We can have the pathfinder, and here we select exclude. When we select that, we can see that it's created a new shape here for us, which is the reverse of what we had before. With this one item here, we can now export this to a separate file. And in this case, I'm just going to export it to the current project that we have. And let's apply that now. So we've got that in here. And let's put that in as the overlay for the banner. So we'll call this we'll call this banner slide overlay.svg. If we take a look at this, that looks exactly like what we need to have for that to work properly. Next up, let's pull this in, and what we'll do is we'll make the image a position of relative. In here, we'll do a new element, which we'll call after the image element, and we'll have a content, which will be blank, display of flex, or maybe block in this case, a position of absolute, width 100%, height 100%, top 0, bottom 0, left 0, and right 0. In here, we'll do the background dash image as the SVG. So we'll just call URL, and here we'll do banner dash slide dash overlay dot svg. Let's apply that and see what it looks like. Great, so we've got it there. It is repeating, so let's remove that. We'll do background, repeat, and we'll do no repeat again. Great, so that's in there. We'll also want the background position on the right. And maybe also at the top. Great, so we've got that in there, and now as we resize it, we can see that it's working. It still has a few issues, like for example, it's not resizing exactly how we want it to. We might want it to stretch, for example. So if we wanted to do that, we'll have to put in another attribute, which is to preserve the aspect ratio being inversed. So let's open up this element here, and in here we'll add this element preserve aspect ratio, and we'll do none. So if we save that, we'll see that it now expands to the full size of the element, but that's obviously a little bit too much. So now we've got to define how big it is. We'll do the width and the height. We'll do the width here. So instead of doing a left element, we'll just do the width as 50%. If we do that, we can see now that it is just about 50% of the width of the element each time we resize, which is perfect and more or less fits what we have here in the design. So I'm pretty happy with that now. We can now have a look at doing the next part of this, which is actually making sure that we have the content here nicely arranged. So this section here is going to be very tricky because of the way it's structured. If we, for example, remove this content here, you'll see that the background doesn't really scale appropriately. What we might have to do is put a content dash holder here. With the content dash holder, we might have it as a flex of 1. So let's do that. Content holder flex of 1. So now we've got a 50-50 in terms of the image and the content holder, but that's probably still too much. I think 0.5 is just about right. Then for the actual content itself, we can paste it in here, and what we can do is we can make this an absolute position. So we can do this by putting in position here, absolute, and we'll do left 0, right 0, top 0, and bottom 0, and Z index maybe 500, just to make sure it's on top. Now this is currently scaled to the top of the image, so we'll just do it straight to the slide element by making it position relative over here. Great. Finally, let's make this a display flex with a justify content of center and align items of center as well. Perfect. Finally, let's make the title here a font size 48 pixels and maybe the subtitle a font size of 24 pixels. And we'll also want this to have a flex direction of column, so those messages are properly aligned. Now we don't want them centered. If we have a look at our design doc, we can see they're off center by about 35 to 40%. So what we'll do is here on the left, let's do 33%. And let's have a look at our document here. So that's almost right. Probably if we do 50%, that should be just about right. Then for the supporting message, we want that to align from the left. So instead of doing text center here, what we'll do is we'll put these elements into another div, and that way they'll be aligned on the left side. Perfect. Now finally, we can clean up the styling a little bit by making sure that the right font. So that's font size 55 bold with this main color 7070. So let's put this in here. So font size 55 pixels, color 7070, and font weight bold. For the subtitle, we can see here it's got a primary color, it looks like, and this is a B2. So let's copy this over and create a primary color here in our variables. We'll set primary and let's paste that in. And down here, we'll set it as color equals $primary. Great. And this is a font size 30. So let's apply that. And let's take a look at our design. So that's looking pretty good. It's more or less what we have here in the document. And I'm pretty happy with that. Let's see how it resizes as well. So it's resizing okay, it's stretching out a little bit, but we can fix that up in a little bit when we do some responsive design. But otherwise it's staying where it should be. We'll also add some padding there on the right. So let's do that now. We'll do padding right 30 pixels. Perfect. There's one more element on this page, which is just this bottom SVG. So what we'll do is let's copy this out into a separate file. We'll click export, selected, SVG, straight to our template folder. In here, let's pull this in, and this time we'll call this banner dash slide dash overlay dash bottom. Let's have a look at the format for this. Let's pull this into our document here and check out the text for it. So that looks pretty standard. The only other thing I'll want to do is make sure that we preserve the aspect ratio. That's very good for resizing. With that saved, what we can do here for our slider is add a new section, which we'll call after, and copy over some of that content we did here. Except in this case, the after section will actually be just that bottom overlay. Let's add that in. Bottom. Background position will be bottom center. Great. Let's make sure that has a width of 100%. We'll leave the height out for now. And we'll do bottom 0, right 0, and left 0. Great. Let's see if that applies. And if we check, it's still not looking right. It's not resizing, and there's a couple of other issues there, but let's fix those up now. So for the height, let's do 100%. That looks fine. And let's check for the position. So position is bottom center, and line height should be 0. Display, probably don't need a display, but we do see there is a bit of a gap there. Let's double check that section in the div, and it's this element over here. So with this element here, we can see that it is off center and it's sort of angled. So there's a few ways we can fix this up. The first is by making sure that this doesn't overflow. So we'll do overflow, and we'll do hidden. Then for this section here, we'll do maybe -5 pixels. If we have a look at our design, it should fit in a little bit better, but the width and height aren't stretching properly. Another thing we could do, for example, is actually pull it in as an image. So here, for example, we can do a class of slide overlay bottom. And we'll pull this in as a class and replace it with the after element here. And if we apply that, and what we'll do here is do a position. Let's leave that as is for now and pull in an image in here. And for that image, we'll use that banner slider overlay bottom. So there it is. And we'll do a width of 100%. And this will now be an absolute position, which will exist on the bottom of the item from the left and the right. And we'll do a Z index of 1000 for this one. So it's on top of all the other elements. Finally, we'll do the bottom section as maybe -4 pixels. Maybe -10 pixels, maybe a little bit more, -15 pixels. So now you can see it overlays without the issue of it losing that bit of inconsistency at the bottom there. So that's a lot better. Next up, we'll need to have a look at adding the call to action. This will be relatively simple to do. If we have a look, it's just simply about 100 pixel height background with some text and an input. So let's copy over this text and create this element. In here, we'll create a section which will be having a container, because we'll use Bootstrap in this case, and we'll have a column length of maybe let's double check. Yeah, about 6. And in here, we'll just simply put our text, and we'll put this as, what's the text here? email request. For this section, we'll call this call to action. And finally, we'll have another column in here. This will also be 6, but this will be the form. So in this case, for the time being, it'll just be an input. And the input type will be text. The placeholder will be email address. Great. So we'll save that. And let's pull this class into our style sheet. We'll create a new class in here called call to action. The background for this class will be the the primary color. The color for the text will be white. And let's see the font size. The font size here is 20 pixels. So let's put that in, font size 20 pixels. If we apply that and have a look, we can see it's already taken effect. There's probably some padding there as well at the top and at the bottom. So if we check what that is, that's about 18 pixels, and I'll average that to about 20. So let's do padding dash top 20 pixels and bottom 20 pixels. Finally, for the input, we want it to have a border radius of 1.5 em, and it looks like it's got a background of white and border none. Let's save that, take a look at what everything looks like. So that looks okay. We've forgotten to add a row in here, so let's quickly do that. And yeah, that's pretty much what we're meant to have. We'll set this width as 100% for the text input. That doesn't seem to have applied yet, but we can apply it in here. That's fine. Beautiful. Now this also might need some padding. I think that's about 15 pixels. And the only other thing is that we want this row to have equal heights. So there's a good bootstrap command for that. So let me pull that up now. So there's a really cool bootstrap command for that, which is align items center. If we apply that, that just makes sure that those two items are centered. So if we take a look, that looks okay. I think the font weight is a little bit darker, maybe 500. So let's just update that. Font weight 500, and this is for our main text here. Great. So if we resize that, we can see that that seems to be right there for the call to action. I'm not sure what the designer was thinking because there's no button here to confirm that, but maybe we'll figure that part out a bit later. Let's take a look at this next section here. It's got an image, a title, description, and a button. But we've got a couple of different elements such as this SVG shape, we've got this image with a masked overlay and a couple of other things. So how do we start doing this? Well, to start off with, let's export this shape into Illustrator. We're going to cut this out by first exporting it. And this will be called, let's have a look what it's called. Where is it hiding? It's this one here, I think. Let's pull this into Adobe Illustrator and have a look at what it actually looks like, because I don't think we can use it in the current state it's in. What we might do is we might clip out the top bit and the bottom bit, which can be resizable objects, and the center bit will just be a box in the middle like this. So let's see if that's opened up. So here we have it. I'll create that first box, which will be just here. And let's resize it a little bit. It's a little bit too big. There we go. So I'm happy with that. We'll hit Control Shift F9 So we'll have this item up here, and what we'll do is we'll exclude it from the current state of the SVG. So if we combine the two and exclude it, we'll have this one element here. This one element here is the element I want to export. So let's do a right click and we'll select export, and we'll just export this to our main directory over here and call this bottom overlay. Great. Then on top of that, we'll do the opposite for the bottom section. So let's pull this in. Let's do a exclusion again. And this one here. All right, so for this bottom bit, we'll export it over here, and we'll just export it as overlay-top. Great, so we've got those two items now, and the second one didn't go to the right folder, so I'm just going to redo that one real quick. Great. And if we have a look here, we've got overlay top and bottom. We'll call this section dash bottom. We'll call this section dash bottom dash overlay, and this one we'll call section dash overlay dash top. With those two done, we can jump back into our document and we'll have a look at creating this section now. So to start off with, let's create this section here by creating a new tag called section, and we'll call this, what should we call this? Important message 1. Great. In this section, it looks like we've got a row with two main columns and a bit of information in the middle there. So I'm just going to do this as a row with a .col lg6, which is a 50% width column, and another one. In here, let's copy over this title and this description. We'll create tags for both. Here, let's put a title tag. And in here, let's grab a description tag. We'll just do that as a P tag. That should be enough. And here we also need a button that says learn more. So let's create this here as an A tag, and we'll put a class to it of BNT for button. Great. Finally, let's make sure this image is in there. So to start off with, let's export this image into Photoshop. And in here, we'll just make sure that the size is right. So 1280 pixels. And let's export this as a JPEG again, like last time. We'll save this and call this important message 1.jpg. And that should be available to us over here. We'll just import this as a simple image. And let's call it over here. Great, let's have a look how that looks. So we can see the elements are here. Let's just make this width 100%. Great. And the last thing we're missing in here is a column, so let's put that in. All right, so now let's see if we can start styling this. To style it, let's open up the style sheet and we'll copy over this class. And in here, the first thing we'll do is we'll make the background color that secondary color variable that we have. We'll add some margin to the top, maybe something like 150 pixels, and maybe the same amount of margin to the bottom. So if we take a look at this, let's just make this min height 800 pixels, 8000 pixels. So if we scroll down, we look at this. We've got the building blocks of what we need here for the template. Let's attach the top and bottom overlays just to give that nice look. In order to do this, what we'll do is create those two objects which we want to overlay. We'll call them section-overlay-top, and maybe one for the bottom as well. for both of these, what we'll want to do is pass in the image, and for this image, it'll be the SVGs we created earlier, which are here. Let's copy these in, and what we'll do is we'll do a overlay for the alt tag and a width of 100%. Great. We can't see those just yet because they're inside the actual element, but what we'll start doing is now styling this so that they actually exist outside the element. We'll have this main element as a position relative, but then for these two section overlays, we'll actually put them outside of the element by doing something sneaky. We'll do a position absolute in this case, and for the bottom, we'll do 100%, left will be 0, and right will be 0. When we do this, we can see it's been popped up at the top here. In this case, we want it at the bottom. So let's do that. And we can see here now it exists at the bottom. We can do the same for the other element. So let's do bottom here and bottom here. So we can see we've got those two elements coming in and they seem to be working okay. We'll need to add some padding. So let's do a padding top of 100 pixels and a padding bottom of 100 pixels. Just so that the text has some room to breathe. And now we can style the text. That was pretty easy, right? The hardest part was just exporting those SVGs. All right, so let's style the text in here. If we have a look at this, if we have a look at the text styling, it's 45 railway regular. So let's put this in here. We'll have a look at the text, and the text has a title class. So in here, let's create the class for title. Font size 45 pixels, and it seems to not fit all the way in. We can do letter spacing and we can make it a bit smaller, maybe -1 pixels, but that might not adhere to the styles that are showing up here. The other thing we could do is actually we could make this entire section a fluid container. So all we do is type in container-fluid. So now it fits all in, it stretches all the way to the sides, which is probably a little bit more adhering to the visual representation of the design here. So we'll leave that as is and save that. And then we'll just update this text here, which is 30 pixels. Let's do that now. P tag, font size 30 pixels. And the color there looks a little bit more gray. It's probably that 77 color. It is. So let's put that in color. Hex 707070. Let's double check the color for this one. This one also is that 707070. So let's update both of these classes and update those. So they look a little bit better now. And finally, we need the button styling done. So this has a background of white. It's got a border radius of 1.5 EM. It's got a padding of about 1 EM, more or less. And what's the font size on the text? It seemed pretty large if I remember correctly. 20 pixels there. So let's do that as well. Font size 20 pixels. And it also has a border radius of 1.5 EM, which we didn't type in properly before. It's got a bit more padding on the sides, so let's fix that up as 1.5 EM, and it's also got a box shadow there from what I remember. It's very slight and subtle, and I think it's only 16%, so let's put that in as well. So we'll just do box shadow 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 16 pixels, and we'll do RGBA and 0.16. Great. I think it's offset a little from the top, so we'll just do 8 here, and that should be more or less what the button looks like. It's got a lot more padding on the sides there, so let's make sure we add that. It's probably 2 or 3 even. So that looks like a closer resemblance, and maybe this is more like 0.75. Usually I just do this by eye, because obviously it'll look different on every screen size, and the goal is just to create a visual representation that is the same as the design doc. Alright, so we've got this element now completely finished. And if we resize it and have a look at it, it's not working on a full width screen. I think that might be because we've got a container dash fluid. If we remove that and maybe add that class for centering items and aligning them properly in the row, we might fix that up. Let's have a look. So that's looking a little bit better, but I still feel like somehow there's not enough room for these elements to properly breathe. If we check this out now, that looks okay as well, but it's not quite right. Let's see what else we can do just to make this work a little bit better. So I'm going to remove the container dash fluid because sometimes that isn't consistent with the theming we've done above. And in this section here, we probably want to reset the size. So the size is technically like this, which is closer to the design doc if we zoom it in by 100%. A lot of the times people make things really big these days in design, so you have to really consider that when you're creating your work. Lastly, let's make sure that this item here is a circle. I can see that there is a masked background image here with an SVG. So there's a couple of ways we could do this. We could export this element as is, and this would mean that we have a PNG that's slightly larger than usual, but it'll have a transparent background. Let's have a look what that'll look like over here. I believe this will be, let's have a look where it's located. So it's this mask group here. So we could call this flowers, for example. And we can simply pull it into the design here by calling an image, and let's see, here we go. If we apply this and have a look at our design, it is more or less what was shown in the design doc. Obviously it's a little bit smaller, and that's due to the fact that it's actually a little bit too large for what it should be. So we can open it up in Photoshop and we can edit it. What we can do in here is we can make sure that the size is 128 pixels. We can crop out the outsides of it so that it just meets right here where the edges are. And then we can save this as a PNG to replace the original file, which is over here. If we take a look at this now, we'll see it's much larger and consistent with the design we originally had. So next, let's have a look at setting up this section, which is really just a repeat of the one above, just reversed and without a background color. This should be pretty simple to do. We'll just copy the entire section here, and maybe we'll call this important message 2. We'll remove these overlays which we aren't using, and this row here, we'll place it below the image this time. If we save that and take a quick look, we can see that we're almost there already. Let's copy the styling we have here, and for important message 2, we'll simply remove the background color. What else will we do? Did we update the title on here? We did too. So we've removed the background here. We'll remove some of that extra padding, which we probably don't need now if we've got a margin. We'll remove the overlays, and that should be about it. I'm pretty happy with that, and it's already achieved the goal of providing the same design here. There is a bit more spacing between this image and the text, but I think that's just to do with the fact that the designer hasn't kept consistent shapes between all the elements. So we can now move on to doing the footer design, which is just this one here, and it's very similar to most of our designs previously. So we can even copy one of our SVG shapes we created and just recolor it and repurpose it. Let's create the footer element here. We'll just call footer, and in here, let's have a look what we need. We need to have a phone number, an email, some social media, and a copyright. So that's pretty standard stuff. What we can do is we can do a container in here with a call LG of 3, 3, and 6, I think. So let's do that now. 3, 3, and 6. Great. Let's make sure this is inside a row. And finally, we'll have one more row, which will have a column size of 12, and that'll be for our copyright. For this footer section, we'll simply call footer as a class object here. And this tag will have a background color of primary. Let's have a look what that looks like in our design. So here it is. There's not much to it, but let's add some padding to the top and bottom. Let's do maybe 50 pixels for both. And for the color of the text, we'll want white. Let's have a look at the sizing. So the sizing is about 20 pixels for the font, and the copyright is only 12 pixels. So let's copy that in. Font size 20 pixels, and for copyright, font size 12 pixels. Great. Now let's put in the phone number here. So let's just copy this across into our HTML. PH here, and email here. Now normally these are clickable objects, so you'd want an A tag surrounding them. I'll fill that in later because they don't really go anywhere at this point in time, but it's more for styling so that we can make sure that the CSS for this on the A tags is also a color white, because otherwise it might revert to a primary color. So if we take a look at this now, it seems to be working. We need to update the hover to also remain white. So let's do that. There we go. And in this section, it looks like it's not quite fitting in. So we'll make this just slightly larger, and this one will be slightly smaller, but that should be more or less okay. Finally, for the footer section, we'll also make this section text align on the right. So all we'll do is use Bootstrap's text-right field. In here, we can use some font awesome icons. Normally that's i.fa.fa-Facebook. And that doesn't seem to be appearing, so we might have to import the Font Awesome package first for that to work. But let's put these in anyway, and these can be A tags with the icons applied, and we'll add this icon package later. We'll have Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And Twitter. Let's take a look at the design here. So that's okay. For the copyright message, let's copy the formatting text for that, which is down here. Great. And this has a little bit of padding on this copyright section too. So what we'll do is we'll add that in, which is about 30 pixels. Let's go into our styling. Let's do margin top 30 pixels, and that's about right. Let's also make sure that Font Awesome is working by importing it from a CDN. Once we do that, we can see the icons are working down there, but they're a little bit too small. So we can simply increase their size by making them maybe 48 pixels. Let's take a quick look, because the current one isn't applied due to the nature of CSS not taking priority. So we'll create the footer as an ID, and we'll pass it in here as a footer. And this will just give it some more priority so that those class stylings apply. With that done, we now have all the social media tags in here, but they don't have the right spacing between each. So what we'll do is we'll just add some margin between each by going margin left 1 EM and margin right 1 EM. If we check this now and have a look at our design, it's almost there. It's just a little bit too much with 1 EM, so we'll do it as half an EM, and that should make it just about perfect. Now we can take a look at adding that SVG overlay. Now we've done a few of those now, so we can simply copy paste one that we've done before. So in this case, let's copy this one over here, and let's put this into the footer. And make sure that the footer has a position of relative. With that done, Make sure I spell that right. With that done, let's just copy that element that we had up here for the footer, and we'll paste that into the footer. And that should apply straight away, but we can see that it's the wrong color. So we can fix that pretty simply by opening it up here where it says section overlay, and we'll call this footer overlay. Here we've got section overlay, and we'll edit this and we'll have this color as this primary color. So the primary color in this case is this B2 color. We'll create it over here. We've got a fill. So we'll put this in and we'll save this as the new object. And in this case, it'll be called footer overlay top. So we've got our footer overlay top.svg, and we've updated one of the colors, but there's still one more here. So let's put that in. If we save that now, we can see both of them are working, but obviously there's a little bit of a gap here. That's because the designer hasn't made the SVGs correctly. The best I can do in this case is maybe make a margin bottom of -1 pixel, maybe 2 pixels, just so that it fits all the way at the bottom here. So let's zoom out and take a look at this. So let's take a look at our design doc. Here we've got our header with our navigation and a hero banner and our call to action. And that's pretty much exactly the same that we've designed now in our code. If we take a look at the next section, section 1, we can see here our important message with a picture. And if we scroll down here, it's pretty much exactly the same. Then if we go down here to section 2, we've got our coffee example with a product, and that's more or less on point. There is a bit more spacing between the text elements here, but that's because there's not a consistent column design in this case, and we're trying to keep things standardized. Finally, we've got our footer elements here with our social media and contact details, the same as that we have down here. So I'm very happy with this design. I hope this has given you a good idea of what it's like to create a design like this in HTML and CSS. In another video, we'll take a look at how to make sure that this design is responsive for tablets and the mobile, and also maybe adding in some animations and other stuff. So just a quick note, if you are a designer making things in Adobe XD, Figma or Sketch, just take a bit more consideration for developers that have to export some of these SVG elements. Sometimes we only have to use a single bit of it, but when you create them as large components that we can't really reuse properly in a design, it makes it a little bit more difficult. And then a developer actually has to jump into Adobe Illustrator and figure out how to crop them themselves, which isn't always easy. As well, when you create elements, make sure that when you take a look at them, they are positioned properly, because sometimes they might indeed be off on an angle. And this means that when you actually use them in production and try to place them in the right places, they don't align, they're a little bit out of the page themselves, and nothing really seems to work, which ends up costing more time in terms of development. But otherwise, I think that also deciding whether you're going to use a bootstrap design or if you're going to make elements more fluid, keep a consistent point in mind on how you're going to create these things, whether the images will be smaller or larger, just so there's more consistency. Because a lot of the times, if you zoom in at 100% on Adobe XD, you'll find the elements don't even fit in on the screen and they looked way too zoomed in. So what ends up happening is for the development lifecycle, we'll actually have to make these font sizes a little bit smaller, and some of these spacings might not be exactly the same. And if you're a developer, there's a couple of things that you should take note. For example, this big section here would be much easier to export as just a JPEG, but it would mean that the size is a lot bigger, and sometimes you want to avoid that and keep things as high quality but low size as possible. You could, for example, have this gigantic SVG as a JPEG as well, but that means that when you resize it at different levels, then it might lose the level of quality. So by keeping it an SVG, you keep it at the lowest level of size while keeping the quality at the highest level. These images here, for example, we exported as PNGs, which means that they're a single use. But if you were to do this better, you would be able to apply an SVG crop or mask that would have the image in there, and that way you can have the image as dynamic and still ensure that you get the clipping mask applied. I hope this gives you a better idea of some of the different ways that you can develop a website. I personally like to also develop stuff in Bootstrap because it allows for a column design, which is much easier. But you could create these in grids or just build the whole thing using Flex, and that's something we might explore in future videos. I hope this video gave you a good idea of what it's like taking a design from Adobe XD and putting it into a full-fledged website by programming out all the HTML and CSS. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than just this, and you can see just how hard it can be to export some elements from programs such as Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD. It's not always easy, and sometimes we have to do a little bit more work to make sure that all the components work just right. I'm doing more videos around design and development. I've got one here on CSS hovers and one here on website development. So if you want to see that and you want to see more content like this, hit like and hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.